Lecture 8, Communicating Your Narrative. So this is going to be a little bit different from what we've been doing for the past couple lectures. We're going to be thinking more about the content of your different design materials than the actual practicalities of using the tools. So for Module 3, this is the first lecture of Module 3, we have a new set of learning objectives. And what we're going to be focusing on now is designing coherent multi-slide presentations with intentional pacing, storytelling, and structure. And so this kind of goes back into that idea of cognitive load. So you want to make sure that you're using the text on the screen well to keep your audience engaged, to not make them work too hard, to kind of present a logical structure. So, why do stories matter? This is maybe going to sound a little bit like an English lesson for a few slides, and so I apologize for that if you're not a fan, but it does connect back into this whole digital design. And so we have the problem of the data dump. And so that's when humans just don't keep mass amounts of information presented all at once like that. So lists or bullet points, a lot of times it gets lost, especially when they get heavier. We are a storytelling species. We like stories. We want to be engaged. And so when we have something that's presented as more of a journey, it's going to be more likely to sit with us than if it's just bullet points of all of the key information. And so you want to be able to present something that can be a memorable experience. So we have the 3-act story. It's kind of the traditional structure. Starts with the hook or the setup where you're establishing the context and the problem, leads into the conflict where we're having the challenges, and then we start to see solutions, data, evidence. And then we have our resolution, which is where it all comes together. And in a presentation, a lot of times there'll be some sort of like a call to action, right? Like what you want your audience to be able to go away with. And so one thing I want you to notice on this slide before we proceed is this image. That's funky, right? So maybe pause the video and stop to look at it a little bit more. I mentioned previously that Canva has AI and that is not great. This is what it created. So the prompt here, a large, clear story mountain graphic, an inverted V shape or a simple line graph that rises and falls. This is what it came up with. And so you can see from this prompt, we have the inverted V shape, we have story, and then everything else is junk, right? So I told it to label the rising part, Act 1. It says Act 2. And then the peak should be Act 2. And that is, I don't know what that says. And then the descent should be Act 3. Act 2 again. All right. So even when we're trying to have this AI and we're trying to use it effectively, we're giving it a fairly clear prompt, it's still not coming up with the best thing. So I have a couple other AI created visuals in the next slides. And so you can see that they're not this bad. They're a little bit better, but they're still not great. So when you're thinking about these visuals, keep this in mind. This will probably be something that improves over time, but it's something that you need to be aware of. And if you put in an image like this in an actual presentation for work or for class, that it's not going to be a good look, right? If you just take whatever it gives out. So you need to be really critical with this. And if it's giving you something that's not great, you just shouldn't use it, right? So getting into that 3-act structure, Act 1 is our setup or our hook. It's where we're establishing the status quo. So what does the audience already know, or what do they assume? We're starting to get into the conflict to see what the actual issue is, or what the problem that we're addressing is, whatever the purpose is, the thing that's brought us to this presentation. We're seeing that here. And then we're going to start to see the stakes. And so you want to keep this brief and impactful. Generally, again, shorter it is, the more it's going to hammer home with the audience. And so also look at this visual here. This is just a spotlight on the conflict. And so that comes through a little bit better, right? It's less of a jumbled visual. It's much more simple. Tends to be the AI can create a simple visual much better than, a more complicated graph. Act 2 is the conflict. And so this is where most of the presentation should be. So you're presenting your data, your analysis, the interpretation of the analysis, the solutions that come out of that, any of the challenges. And you're still relating that to the audience, right? So it's clear why the audience should care about it. And then we get to the climax, or the moment that the problem's becoming super clear. Really, this is where things should start to make sense. So through this second act, a lot's happening. You're starting to present the actual facts here, but then also the audience is being led to the point where they're going to start to see, okay, what's the resolution going to be? And so that keeps them engaged because they're going through the journey with you. And so this is an AI visual that's meant to represent a journey. It's pretty, right? Like the mountains are nice, but it's not necessarily representing that journey aspect well. So you see the arrows here, they're going different directions. It's not great. Act 3 is your resolution. And so that's how, everything that you've just presented in Act 2, how is that going to impact your audience, the bigger picture? Why is it important to know? What are the key takeaways? And then what should your audience do next? So if it's a work presentation, it's okay. How do we divvy up the tasks to be able to go into the next stage here? If it's a presentation for class, what's the big answer here, right? You had your thesis, you've done your research. What is the finding? What do we need to know now? What are we taking away from the presentation? And so with this, you're set up to the confrontation, to the resolution. It's a clear arc. It has that traditional narrative structure that will just bring in humans. It'll get them engaged. You need to be aware of some things as you go through. And so we'll talk about those in a minute. But your audience here should feel like a main character, right? Like it should be something that is appealing to them. So this is why it's so important that you actually know your audience so you can set the structure up in a way that is actually going to interest them. So a presentation that's geared toward teenagers is not going to hit in the same way it would in a work environment where your colleagues are on the way to retirement, right? You need to be aware of those different things. And there's elements that you might include in one circumstance that you wouldn't include in others. So it's why it's just important that you've done that background knowledge. So now you would do it, right? You would take all of that and put it into action in a presentation. And so we have all heard KISS before, right? So keep it simple. You smart person. Got a replacement there. So you want to make sure that you're using a clear structure throughout your slides. You want to keep them pretty much focused on one main idea. So you can have some sub points, of course, but you don't want to be trying to jam too much into one slide. And so with those slides as well, you want to use transitions to go from one piece to the next. So this was my transition slide here. I went from giving you the information about the 3-act structure to now, okay, how are we putting it into practice? And so this kind of gets back a little bit more to what our lectures have been about in the past and actually using these tools. And so you also want to be very attentive to your pacing. And so you might think that pacing is a verbal thing, right? It's something like related to sound and how it's coming across. We think about control of your rhythm and your movement, right? Sometimes it could be how you're like up walking around the room as you go. But pacing is also relevant in just building the actual slides themselves, even if you're not going to present the slides. So you want to think about how many slides there are. Is your audience going to be able to sit through or read through, guide themselves through 30 slides? Or does it need to be more concise? Does it need to be 6 slides? And so when you understand that, you understand the purpose, the context, you can decide whether it needs slower or faster pacing. And so slower, you can give a lot more detail. You can start to go into things that maybe feel almost like peripheral. Faster pacing means you need to be just really quick. You might use more dynamic visuals. You're going to have really quick stories. And the slides are going to have much less information on them because it's things that people can kind of look through quickly and still take in what they need to. So your pacing is really important with this, and it might not be something that you'd previously thought about in this sort of format. It's not just getting up and giving the presentation. And so this can also apply to, advertisements on Instagram. I've used that example a lot, but still, if you have moving elements within that, you want to be aware of how the kind of speed or the control works, how somebody's going to be taking it in. So your takeaways here, The 3-act narrative that I'm sure you've already studied in English classes before is relevant to building these presentations as well. It gives you that structure, the clarity that you need to engage your audience, and just also make sure that your communication is being effective. Pacing fits into that as well, adjusting the flow of information as appropriate. And then you've seen examples that AI, on Canva at least, is not creating good images yet. I've actually had better luck with it creating short, like very, very short 10-second videos than static images. So that's something that might come in handy. You might have an instance where a video is more appropriate, and AI might be able to do that. I specifically had it creating stereotypical things. So there's that piece as well. Play around with it, see, it's going to evolve over time. But right now, just be very cautious of relying on any of the Canva AI tools.